Probably the best known ski resort in eastern Canada, Mont-Tremblant is also an extraordinary destination for cyclists. It's connected to the Montreal region by the Petit Train du Nord, or Little North Train, which is an old railway line turned into a multifunctional trail.
We enjoyed a lot of biking in and around Montreal this past summer, but this route stands out as a must-do. The scenery is really diverse. You'll see forests, rivers, mountains, lakes, and marshlands, which we found especially impressive in early October with the fall colors.
As an old railway line, the trail goes right through lots of small towns with amenities like hotels, cafes, and bike shops, and the trail is as flat and straight as possible given that you're climbing into the Laurentian Mountains. Plus, interaction with car traffic is really minimal.
There are a few different ways to approach the route. The entire trip from Montreal to downtown Mont-Tremblant is about 140 kilometers, but we chose to take the XO commuter train from Montreal to Saint-Jérôme as a starting point, leaving about 85 kilometers of cycling to Mont-Tremblant.
We'd done the bike ride from Montreal to Saint-Jérôme before, and we were comfortable skipping it this time. It's a reasonably nice suburban route, but it's not until you get closer to Saint-Jérôme that it actually becomes the Petit Train du Nord and you start to see mountains.
If you want an even more casual ride, you can take the train and then also stay a night at a halfway point to Mont-Tremblant, like Val-David or Saint-Agathe, doing the ride there in 2 45-kilometer days. We actually made a last-minute decision to do this because of a concerning rain forecast.
Leaving Montreal, we went to Park Station for the commuter train, which has spots for bikes. The train ride and bike route to Saint-Jérôme actually follow each other pretty closely, so taking the train for this part doesn't mean you're missing out on much.
We got off the train at Saint-Jérôme, the end of the line and the gateway to the Laurentian Mountains. The trail is easy to find because it's where the tracks used to continue onto. Continuing through town on the trail, we got into nature pretty quickly as we met the Rivière du Nord, or North River. Getting to follow alongside rivers is one of the best parts of the trip.
A majority of the 85 kilometers to Mont-Tremblant is gravel, but a significant portion is paved, and on our trip we actually saw them paving new portions in the middle. As for elevation, the first half is mildly uphill, then it levels off for a bit, then the final stretch to Mont-Tremblant is moderately downhill.
There's a lot to like about this trip, from the natural scenery to the small towns that you get to pass through, but one highlight is simply not having to deal with cars. We can handle some amount of biking on the road, but when it's an extended period of time and the traffic is more than modest, we find that it just wears us out mentally with all the noise and close calls.
On this trip, cars are basically not a concern. Aside from venturing off into towns that you pass through, the only time you'll really encounter cars are at the occasional points where the trail crosses a road, but these are well marked and we found drivers here to be polite and careful.
Unfortunately, the weather didn't cooperate quite as much as the drivers did. We left a day early on Thursday to make it halfway and try to avoid some rain on Friday, but we ended up getting rained on pretty badly both days. Compared to our Trois-Rivières trip, we were better prepared with more changes of gloves and socks, but it was still a challenge. We also experimented with plastic bags on our shoes, and that was surprisingly kind of effective, and it looked cool.
We learned some new lessons about dealing with the rain, like that it would be good to take a large umbrella, not so much to use while riding, but because it would allow us to take a break and wait out the rain whenever we wanted, instead of hoping for underpasses. If anyone has other recommendations for dealing with long periods of rain, especially for hands and feet, which were the biggest problems for us, we'd love to hear about it in the comments.
One positive side to the rain is that the dark and stormy atmosphere brought out some really rich and vibrant colors. There's one part of the trail before Valmorin where you pass over a lake that would look pretty picturesque at any time, but at that time of day in those particular weather conditions, it was impressive enough for us to stop despite being pretty cold.
That night we stayed in Val-David, which is a pretty good middle ground if you want to split the trip up. Although one advantage of this route is that because it's an old railway line, it goes through lots of small towns and you're never really that far away from amenities like hotels and restaurants, even though you spend most of your time in nature.
The next day we started on the second 45-kilometer leg to Mont-Tremblant. Again, we had some pretty significant rain problems that we waited out at the old train station in Saint-Agathe, and then also in a random wooden structure on the grounds of a forestry company. Apologies to them if this wasn't allowed, but on the plus side we can highly recommend their forestry products.
The final stretch to Mont-Tremblant is nicely paved and downhill, just steep enough that we appreciated the extra boost on our way there, but not steep enough that it was much extra effort to climb a few days later, when we left to go back to Montreal.
Speak for yourself.
This area had a warning to watch out for bears due to a recent sighting, and we weren't entirely sure how much we should be concerned.
After this, we finally arrived in Mont-Tremblant, specifically the Saint-Jovite sector, where we stayed, which is different from the ski resort. It has a pretty quaint downtown with shops and restaurants set against a nice mountainous backdrop.
We stayed at the Mountain View Inn, where we had a good experience, practicing French with the owner and talking about bikes with someone else who worked there. It was a really cozy place surrounded by nature, and we would definitely recommend staying there if you don't mind climbing a hill every time you come back to your room.
We have a tradition of getting cheap ice cream from McDonald's on our bike trips, and this one was no exception. But unfortunately, the Mont-Tremblant location had dining enclosed, and so we had the weird experience of taking our bikes through the drive-thru. When we got to the drive-thru window, they looked right past the apparent joke that was us on bikes, as if trying to spot the motorized vehicle that brought us there. They eventually gave us our food.
As for the ski resort, that's still 15 or 20 kilometers away, depending on how closely you follow the trail as opposed to the road to get there. We stuck closely to the trails, getting some very nice river views and going by Lac Mercier, where we turned off the train trail to go through town and head to the ski resort. In Lac Mercier, we enjoyed this wonderful slide that's definitely not just for kids, and we saw a family of deer having apples for lunch on someone's front lawn.
By the standards of this trip, the final stretch to the resort is a bit of a roller coaster of speed and elevation, but it's as good of an example as any of the fall colors that we were looking for on this trip. The ski resort itself wasn't the main draw for us, but it was worth seeing, and we stuck around for a half hour or so, which was most definitely not because we wanted to get more ice cream or anything. There obviously would have been more to do at the resort if we planned for it, so maybe next time, when it's not a pandemic.
After the resort, we headed back to our hotel to leave for Montreal the next morning. We did the return trip in one day, biking 85 kilometers to Saint-Jérôme. We found this a pretty reasonable distance to cover in a day, and definitely less of a challenge than the 150 kilometers we did to Trois-Rivières, although we were still a little rushed because we wanted to catch a particular train time in Saint-Jérôme. Because it was the weekend, the commuter train only went as far as Laval, so we had to switch to the metro to get back to Montreal.
This trip to Mont-Tremblant is the last of the 5 major bike trips that we filmed around Montreal in the summer of 2020. They were all worth doing, but the simplest to recommend in terms of accessibility to everyone are the 3 that mostly don't involve riding with cars. Of those 3, all offer impressive scenery, whether the canals of Chambly, the skyline of Montreal, or the Laurentian Mountains, depending on how adventurous you want to be with time and distance.